Hello, everyone, and welcome to Women in Cleantech Book Club event. I'm very excited to talk about this book, and we're so lucky to have Natalie Zant and Heather Enos-Graves with us today guiding the discussion. My name is Joey Scholl, Events Director for WCS. Thank you for being with us today and choosing to dedicate an hour and a half of your beautiful summer evening to discuss this awesome book, Venture Deals. We will start with some quick housekeeping items, then move on to the discussion of the book with Heather and Natalie, and we'll have some dedicated time for breakout rooms and Q&A. So please don't hesitate to drop your questions in the chat. So some quick Zoom etiquette before we start, which you're all probably pretty familiar with after 3 years of virtual meetings, but just a few reminders. Please write your full name, turn on your video if you feel comfortable doing so. We love to see your faces, and we encourage you to put your LinkedIn profile in the chat to connect with other attendees. The more you get involved and active during the event, the more you benefit from it. So who are we? WCS is a nonprofit originally founded in the San Francisco Bay Area. We are now in 13 countries and have a membership base of more than 500 professional women and men. The goal of the organization is to support women in their careers in the clean tech industry. And WCS is celebrating 10 years, which is pretty impressive considering we're a nonprofit primarily run by volunteers. So what we do at WCS, we do monthly events such as panels and social events. We're now a global organization, so keep your eye out for an event near you, like the LA event we have coming up next month. We also have a mentorship program, and applications open in December. More information is available on the website. And our annual flagship event, WCS Talks, is a TED-style event. Save the date for January 20th at Plug and Play in Sunnyvale, California. Speaking of events, here are upcoming events. January 20th, we have an Inflation Reduction Act panel. We'll talk about what's in it for you and what's new. San Francisco has a chapter building event on July 20th. It's in person in Mountain View in case you're up there. August 3rd, we have an executive leadership workshop with Julie Castro-Abrams of How Women Lead. And August 19th, save the date for a fireside chat with Genelva Williams at Italy in Los Angeles at the Century City Shopping Center. And our next book after this one is October 19th, is Braiding Sweetgrass, save the date. And membership, in case you're not a WCS member yet, I encourage you to sign up using the QR code to do so. You'll get reimbursed from tonight's event. Feel free to reach out to me or any other WCS members on the call if you have any questions about membership. All right, so today's moderator, Natalie Zant, founder and CEO of Meter Leader, a web platform that gamifies saving energy at home using real-time utility data and behavioral science. Prior to starting Meter Leader, Natalie worked as an energy efficiency consultant for over 6 years, implementing energy efficiency programs for utilities in California and Maryland. Natalie is passionate about combining her interests in technology, UX design, and behavioral science in order to positively impact the environment. In her spare time, Natalie enjoys reading science fiction, drawing, and hanging out at the beach. And we're lucky to have Heather Enos-Graves with us today. Heather is a team lead of special programs for the Maryland Energy Administration, working to identify and pursue federal grant opportunities, as well as contributing to the ongoing efforts to quantify the greenhouse gas emissions reduction benefits for the MEA programs and policies. Prior to working at MEA, she worked for a small energy procurement and sustainability consulting company. Heather is a lead AP in operations and maintenance with an undergraduate degree in electrical engineering from the University of Florida and a graduate degree in industrial engineering from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. In her free time, she likes to spend time with her husband, son, and 2 cats. All right, Natalie and Heather, I'll let you two take it away.
Great. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. Awesome. Can we go on to the next slide? Okay, perfect. So hi, everyone. I'm Natalie Zant, and we chose this book specifically to help women who are interested in entrepreneurship, whether they're in the process of fundraising or maybe thinking about it or just even curious about it. I will say this book was especially dense. So we're going to do our best today, and our goal is to really have those rich discussions in the breakout rooms. And with that, I'll get started. So first, we're going to do a quick sort of summary of the book before we go into breakouts. So really, this book is all about fundraising. So the real question that you want to ask yourself if you're thinking about fundraising is, do you need to fundraise now? And reason being is a lot of people sometimes just jump into the fact that, okay, I need money. I need to fundraise now. But a lot of investors like to see that you input some of your own sort of sweat capital or your savings into some kind of venture. And obviously that's not doable for everyone, but if you're at least able to be scrappy, put a little bit of your own money into getting things started, that may impact, whether you need to fundraise now or later. Another question that you'll want to think about is what milestone do you need to reach for that fundraising effort? How much money do you want to raise? Usually investors, don't like when an entrepreneur is wishy-washy about how much money they want to raise. So you'll want to make sure that you have a specific amount that you determine you want to raise based on, again, the milestone you want to achieve and how much money it will take to get there. Then the next question is, who do you want to raise from? And then when do you need to raise the money? So how long is your runway and how long, how much money should you raise so that you can get to that next milestone and have the amount of time you need to get there. So to answer those questions, really the next slide is helpful. So Joey, can you click next? So this here is a quick guide to funding rounds. And on the left-hand side is just stages of a startup. And kind of across the top is, how much typically you would want to raise in that round, the amount of annual recurring revenue you should have around the round you're raising for, the type of traction you should have, as well as the funding and sources available for each of those rounds. Speaking from my own experience running a startup, I've had good luck with incubators and accelerators. A lot of people, especially in the pre-seed stage, try the friends and family route. It never occurred to me to do that just because I didn't have those type of resources. So I found accelerators and incubators to be, very helpful in raising sort of that initial sort of pre-seed round. So I definitely encourage that. But this is a good chart to help you determine kind of the questions that we just walked through. So we'll have this presentation available later as well for your reference. Okay, so next slide. Okay, so now that you've determined that, you want to fundraise, how much money you want to fundraise, and kind of who you're targeting, these are going to be the players involved in your fundraising process. So obviously you have the founders, you have venture capitalists, and these are firms that raise money from limited partners to invest in promising startups or even larger venture funds. You have angel investors, and these are individual investors. And one thing to note is that if you do pursue angel investment, make sure that these individuals qualify as being an accredited investor. The term syndicate is essentially just a collection of investors, but within a syndicate, there will always be sort of that lead investor. Lawyers are usually involved, and I just noted here, this was straight from the book, that early stage financing can be done between $5,000 to $20,000, and like a larger financing beyond kind of the seed stage can usually be done for $20,000 to $40,000. You may have your mentor involved as well, or people who have gone through this process already. Those would be instrumental. And then accountants and investment bankers are usually for later stage of funding rounds. Again, sort of in my experience, having kind of a good lawyer has been really helpful, helping you kind of set up your cap table, and helping to prepare the documentation that you'll need for the due diligence process. So with that, let's go on to the next slide. So now that we kind of went through the players, what are we about to embark on? What's the process? So again, referencing the book, the goal is really to get several term sheets from an investor, since competition drives better term for the entrepreneur. And so to get there, we're going to take about, let's see, 4 different steps. So we're going to get prepared. So that involves preparing your due diligence materials. So these are a lot of the like legal kind of documents that you'll want to put together, and the VC will want to make sure that your company is a legitimate company. You have like financial records, capitalization table, any kind of IP agreements. So make sure you have all these sort of like legal agreements sort of bundled. And then besides that, you're going to also want to prepare your actual fundraising materials. So usually this involves an elevator pitch, which you can include in like the email body. And so this is just like a short 3-paragraph kind of pitch. You can have an executive summary. This is usually like a 1 to 3 page document. You can have you'll have your investment pitch PowerPoint deck, and this is usually around like 10 to 20 slides. 10 is like, I think, the preferred amount of slides, though that varies. You'll want to be prepared to do a live product demo as you kind of go through this process with a VC. Sometimes they may ask for a business plan, just depending on what stage you're at, and then your financial model as well. So these are the materials to get prepared. The next step is you'll want to develop relationships with VCs. So start to get to know them, and identify the ones that will be your best long-term partners. And there's often a saying that if you want money, ask for advice. So in this kind of stage in the process, it's really about sort of reaching out to these VCs, getting to understand them as organizations, but also as people, and starting to ask for advice so that later you can come back to them and pitch down the line. So developing those relationships is helpful, but depending on your timeline, it depends how much time you have to sort of develop. Next slide. So the next step is finding your lead VC. So once if you've been able to communicate with different VCs and you really identified kind of your main kind of lead VC targets, you'll first want to figure out their preferred channel of introduction. So do they want to be kind of have a warm introduction? Do they want to be kind of introduced, at an event? Usually a warm introduction is the preferred way to be introduced, but a cold introductions, may also work depending on who you're approaching. Understanding who the role of the person who is your primary contact that you're working with, so that if they're kind of lower on the totem pole, let's say if they're like an analyst or something, and they're sending you on a goose chase, like trying to hunt down all these documents that you don't have, that's really something to pay attention to. That, okay, should I be wasting kind of my time with all these different asks if this person is not the one making the decision? So understanding kind of the role of the person you're talking to is important. And then once you get started, it's good to ask them what is your process, so that you understand how they function and their normal timelines and what they're going to be asking of you throughout that process. And then while the VC is doing due diligence on your company, that is also a good time to ask for introductions to some of their founders to understand how that VC is. And there's a saying that the relationship with a VC is longer than the average marriage in the United States. So really vetting VCs in the same way they're vetting you is important. And then lastly, you're going to close the deal. So that involves signing the term sheet and signing of the definitive documents and receiving the cash. And usually for that second part, your lawyer will handle that. But really, the term sheet is what's really important because it dictates all of the terms of all of the other documents. So next. So with that, we can jump into the term sheet. So really, when an investor is making an investment in a company, what they really care about is the economics and control of the investment. So economics refers to the return the investors will ultimately get in a liquidity event. And liquidity event can usually either mean like the sale of the company, an acquisition, a wind down, or an initial public offering. And the control aspect, these are terms that have direct impact on the investor's return. And it refers to the mechanisms that allow investors either to exercise control over the business or to veto certain decisions the company can make. So those are the two things you need to keep in mind when you look at the term sheet, is just kind of what are the economics and control terms of this agreement. And then the other kind of big thing to just keep in mind is the difference between sort of common stock and preferred stock. And common stock is the stock that founders and employees receive, while preferred stock is the stock that investors receive when they purchase equity. And something to keep in mind, investors can decide to convert preferred to common stock and give up all their associated special rights. But once they do that, they can't reverse that decision. Next. So kind of doing an overview of the economic terms of the term sheet, we have valuation, and that'll determine how much the company you are selling, how much dilution you will take in a financing, and it'll determine the price per share at which you sell your stock. How your company is valuated is determined by a lot of different things. For example, like the stage of your company, and then also even the your team. Like, do you have a really experienced set of operators at the team? Let's see what other aspects kind of determine valuation. The size and trendiness of the market. Also, a lot of VCs, because of that, when we talked about kind of those different stages of companies, there are VCs who have natural entry points at which they're interested in coming in. So they'll have sort of natural valuations that they typically go after. And then obviously the performance and numbers and metrics themselves, as well as the current economic climate. So all those factors really go into the valuation of a company. And really at the early stages, it's really hard to kind of come up with an exact value for a company, especially if maybe you're not even generating revenue at that point. One thing to keep in mind when you're reviewing term sheets is make sure you understand when somebody is referring to valuation, whether they're talking about pre-money valuation or post-money valuation, because that can have a huge impact on the amount of kind of equity and price per share. So just be cognizant that when you're negotiating these terms, make sure you understand what valuation is being discussed, whether it's pre-money or post-money, because that'll impact your equity stake and the price per share. Another term here is fully diluted, and this means when determining the price per share, it assumes the conversion of all outstanding stock of the company will be used in those calculations. And then another term to note is the employee option pool. So this is the amount of equity reserved to compensate and motivate the company's workforce. Typically, an employee option pool is anywhere from 10 to 20%. But keep in mind that the employee option pool will have an impact on the equity that is spread out amongst founders and investors. So it's important to have that and to motivate your workforce, but just know that it will also impact the founders' amount of equity. Next. Couple other terms. So warrants are similar to a stock option and is a right for an investor to purchase a certain number of shares at a predefined price for a certain number of years. It was recommended in the book for entrepreneur to negotiate for a lower pre-money valuation to try to eliminate the use of warrants because of the introduction of a lot of complexity. The next term we have is a liquidation preference. So this impacts how the proceeds are shared in a liquidity event. For many years, a 1x liquidation preference was the standard. And what that means, 1x just means that the investor would get back what they had already invested in before any of the remaining proceeds were distributed amongst founders, employees, etc. So there's two components to liquidation preference. There's the actual preference, and this effectively provides downside protection for the investors while allowing them to also have the upside in an exit where they choose to convert to common stock. Joey, next. And then there's also participation. That's the other component. And there are 3 types. And I hope this is going to make sense, but definitely can sort of discuss these terms further in the breakout sessions. So we have no participation, which indicates that the stock doesn't participate after receiving their liquidation preference. There's full participation, where a stock will receive its liquidation preference, typically 1x, and then share in the liquidation proceeds on an as converted basis, where as converted means if the stock were converted into common stock based on its conversion ratio. So this is the have your cake and eat it too scenario. And then there's capped participation, where the stock will receive its liquidation preference and then share in the liquidation proceeds on an as converted basis until a certain multiple of the original purchase price is reached. Next. So one of the last economic terms we have here is the anti-dilution clause. This term is what will change the conversion ratio that we discussed in the liquidation preference section, and is what protects investors from having their ownership diluted in the event a company issues equity at a lower valuation than in previous financing rounds. So there's 2 varieties of this. One is the weighted average, and this is the most common anti-dilution provision. It's based on the weighted average concept, which takes into account the magnitude of the lower priced issuance, not just the actual valuation. And then there's the ratchet-based anti-dilution. If the company issues shares at a price lower than the price of the series with the full ratchet provision, then the earlier round price is effectively reduced to the price of the new issuance. Next. Okay, so let's see. Yeah, so that that kind of concludes the economic terms that you should pay attention to when you're looking at a term sheet. There were a few others that were mentioned in the book, but we had to cut down some of these slides because there's not enough time to go over them. So, you know, I would just encourage you to look at the book for some of the other items, but those were the main kind of economic terms. And now we'll point out some of the control terms of the term sheet. So while VCs often have less than 50% ownership of a company, they usually have a variety of control terms that effectively give them control of many activities of the company. So you have one of these terms is board of directors. The board has to approve many important actions that the company takes, including budgets, option plans, mergers, IPOs, new offices, significant expenditures, financing, and hiring of C-level executives. And they usually also have the ability to fire a CEO. So the election of remaining directors is often hotly negotiated, and there's two types of ways to do it. You can agree to do a common and preferred voting as a single class, or you can vote by mutual consent. Another term is called protective provisions, and this effectively is a veto right that investors have on certain actions by the company. Next. We have also the drag along agreement. And so under certain circumstances, the company will not want a specific shareholder to vote his shares in whatever way the shareholder wants, but instead prefers to have the shares voted by a certain investor or class of investors. So there's two types of situations where that could happen, where the preferred investor drags along the common shareholders, or if a founder leaves the company, their stock will be dragged along by all the other classes of stock. And then let's see, we have also this term called conversion. So allows the buyer of the preferred stock to convert to common should they determine on a liquidation that they would be better off getting paid on a common basis. But this conversion can also be used in certain extreme circumstances where an investor wants to control a vote of the common based on a certain issue. Next. Okay, so that concludes my section. I know that was a little dry, and I apologize for not having more images. But I think it's really good to just have those terms on your kind of like underline list, so that when you go through your term sheet, you're looking specifically for those terms and making sure that you're paying attention to specifically those variables of economics and control. So with that, I'll pass it on to Heather.
Well, thank you so much, Natalie. So one of the chapters did a good job of focusing on how a venture capital fund works and looking at the point of view of the venture capitalist. So as a founder, as someone who's trying to raise capital for your own company, having an idea of what the other side is going through, their motivations, and being able to use that to your advantage. So the way they broke it down is you have your GP, your general partner. Those are usually the ones who are the actual VCs. They have their management company or their various funds that they have within with them. And then like behind them are the limited partners. And those are basically the bosses of the VCs. So if the VC is also trying to make money in this deal with the investment, return on their investment, and that goes up the chain to the limited partners. Yeah, and I think that covers most of it, and obviously more questions if later. Next, Joey. I felt this chapter on negotiation tactics was probably my favorite. As the authors point out, you're using negotiation tactics all the time, just in everyday interactions, like with your partner, of who's going to get the kids, who's going to get the groceries. The three things that matter when with financing is achieving a good and fair result, not killing your personal relationship, getting there, and understanding the deal that you're striking. And that was one theme that I noticed throughout the book, was the importance of relationships. A lot of the times when you're getting your VC into place, that's going to be a longer relationship, as Natalie pointed out, perhaps possibly longer than some marriages. So in this process of setting up this financing, you don't want to burn the other person at the beginning of the relationship. You want to figure out how they work, what they need, how to best meet those needs, but also still make sure that your needs are getting met. One thing that they pointed out in this chapter was the prisoner's dilemma. They did a nice little explanation of game theory. And one thing they pointed out is prisoner's dilemma works if it's a one-time instance. You only play the game once. But when you're negotiating a financing, there are several renditions of this game. So you don't want to burn a person because you might be going back to them for financing at a later date, or they'll be on your board and you don't want to have them purposefully blocking you because of the negative interaction at the very beginning. One quote that I pulled out was, "This is your company and your deal, not your lawyers." One thing that I did appreciate about the book is they tried to bring in blocks called the entrepreneur's perspective, where they try to bring a very experienced entrepreneur to kind of give his viewpoint of what was being discussed. And that was one thing of, there's a lot of legal meat to the deal, but at the end of the day, it's your company and your deal. And so that's why you want to be aware of all the different terms in the term sheet. And that's why you want to be aware of the negotiation tactics so that you can be ready for pursuing this deal for your company. Next. So they talked about raising the money more. Even though the chapter was called Raising Money the Right Way, it was all about what not to do when you're raising money. The first thing was, don't be a machine. And again, it goes back to the idea that a lot of this is really about relationships. How you get introduced to a VC is about a relationship. How you interact with them through the process of due diligence, through the process of the negotiation. That's all about personalities. So if they don't really like your relationship, your personality, then they probably won't invest in you. It's very human. Don't ask for a non-disclosure agreement. Mostly it's VCs, this is their job, their profession. They're going to treat it professionally. And for a lot of these the things to avoid, these might make you look a little bit like a novice, and asking for the non-disclosure agreement is one of those. Don't email carpet bomb VCs. Basically, again, it's about the relationship building. So if you're just sending this stock email, people are going to recognize that and they aren't going to respond as favorably. No often means no, like that's okay. There are other VCs, you can move on. Don't ask for a referral if you get a no. And this puts the VC that you're asking for a referral in an awkward position, because they've already said no to your idea, but then there's the implicit endorsement of you if they're giving a referral. And so then if someone's like, well, you didn't fund them, why should we fund them? And that puts them in a very awkward position. Don't be a solo founder, meaning it's very much a team effort, and building a good team around you in this process is a very important step. And don't overemphasize patents was another one of just patent pending is something VCs hear a lot, and they're more concerned with how is the business going to prosper. Next. Some different issues at different financing stages. So for the seed deals, you can sometimes get too good of a deal. And so that leads to not enough of a foundation when you're doing the next round of funding. And it's kind of about managing expectations at this stage. Early stage, it's usually this is the first VC-led round. And so a lot of this sets the precedence for future fundraising rounds. And especially with the liquidation preference and the protective provisions of like being able to veto, then that can impact those future financing. And then also with mid and late stages, it's as more VCs come on, you get more members of the board. So then the larger boards are difficult for you to be able to influence or control. And then also how the company is valued can shift as well. Next. So a letter of intent is sometimes what the authors called the other term sheet. And this is if an investor wants to purchase, if I'm remembering that correctly, it's if an investor actually wants to purchase the company and acquire it, not just fund it. And so then they stepped through a lot of new terms that were involved there. A couple of things that really stuck out to me was the asset deal versus the stock deal, which are they just getting kind of like almost gutting the company to be able to own it, which is the asset deal versus the stock deal. And if I recall correctly, you kind of want a mix of both. You don't want all in one basket or all in the other. And then another thing that the author spent a lot of time on was the shareholders representatives. That usually there is one person who is representing the shareholder, and this is usually an unpaid position, but there can be a lot of work involved in it depending on what stage you're in. And it can get really tricky and some things can fall through the cracks. So one thing they recommended was to do a shareholder representative service. Although I would take that with a grain of salt since they had their own shareholders representative service company that they mentioned in the book. Next. And so now that we've gone through all of this, they finally asked the question, well, why do term sheets even exist? At one point, they talked about like, why can't it just be a handshake? It's just, yes, I believe in you. Let's shake hands and we'll make the deal. And so the term sheets exist if this is a new relationship and you don't know that you can trust them, then you do want that term sheet in place to put those constraints and put those guidelines around this new relationship that's forming and making sure everyone is holding up their end of the bargain. Next. Then they tried to go through several terms of the legal side of it. And again, these are terms for you to be familiar with, such as intellectual property and who owns what. The section 409A valuations is in the tax code of how the company is getting valued. The 83B election is a form that's necessary and they recommend just doing it and getting out of the way. And again, another reason to have a good team with you is there is a lot that goes into it. So having help with all of these. But ultimately they said, find a good lawyer that you can trust, and you can work through that with a lawyer. Next. And here we are.
Great. Thanks, Heather. So I think since we have a smaller group, we're going to do just one big breakout room. And we're not going to sort of break out into separate groups. We'll just stay together. Let's see, Joey, is there anything else? I think we wanted to, in order to get started, I'd love to, for everyone to introduce themselves and maybe let us know kind of where you're calling from and also where you work. And then after like maybe after these introductions, we can dive into these questions. So I think Heather and myself are already sort of, we had introductions. Who would like to go next?
I can go next. If no one else wants to go. I'm Carla. I'm the founder of an early stage venture called Harsh Electronics. We're working on modernizing grid infrastructure for more EV charging plazas because right now the grid is super outdated and there's a huge need to make it better. I'm calling from Boston, and I read most of the book, but I didn't get to finish it. So I'm sorry about that.
No worries. That's why we did the summary.
It was helpful.
Great.
Hi, thanks Natalie and Heather for the presentation. I call from LA, and I'm an aspiring VC or entering the space. I'm already in climate, but entering more in like the flowing capital toward climate space. So yeah, thanks for the breakdown. And I've read half the book, working on it, and I just completed a going venture capital going VC program. That was like kind of like 4 months of learning all of that.
That's awesome.
So thanks for summarizing it.
Maylise, you probably kind of know these terms better than, so you can probably illuminate maybe some of the stuff that I wasn't as clear on, because I myself had some issues understanding some of the concepts. Great.
Hi, I'm Annabelle. I am here in Minneapolis. I work at a university overseeing a center that does research, and there's some affiliations to the startup world and incubators and accelerators. And so I just wanted to learn more about this whole world. So.
Awesome. Thanks for joining. Joey, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm in Phoenix currently, and I work full-time for WCS. So all of this sounds like Greek to me, but I feel like I'm ready to start a company, something. It's fascinating to learn all this. Thank you.
Yeah, awesome. Well, thanks for the introductions, everyone, and feel free to put your LinkedIn into the chat. I know Lisa is actually the VC lead at LACI, the Los Angeles Cleantech Incubator. So she wasn't able to stay on, but you know, for people who are kind of actively pursuing fundraising, she's definitely somebody good that you should be in touch with. Yeah, glad she was able to make at least the beginning. So with that, yeah, maybe we can just go into the first question. You know, if you did read the book, what was your favorite and or least favorite part? Or if you didn't read the book, you know, what was interesting, or what do you have questions still about from the presentation? So maybe we can start with that question.
Yeah, I'll jump in and just say that I think that they have a definitely the book covers so much and all the terms and in very detailed ways, but I really enjoyed all the different examples that they add and that you can always refer to and get back to the book and read more, and also the little notes about, okay, is that in favor of the entrepreneur, or is that kind of greedy from the investor side? And I think just having those pointers is actually very helpful, both as an investor and potentially a founder.
Yeah, definitely. And I know there was part of me that wanted to do a little kind of exercise with the group, on a spreadsheet, kind of going through some of the terms and changing the math depending on the pre-money valuation or the post-money valuation, but that was way too ambitious for today. But to your point, that is all those examples are in the book, so it's definitely good to refer back. Anyone else want to share?
I really liked how they talked about lawyers in the book. My background is very electrical engineering, technical, so this whole book was an adventure in topics that I knew nothing about, and one especially about the legal side of it, the financing. Finding someone that really works with you is, I found, really helpful. Someone that you could connect with, and not just that does a service for you, I guess.
Yeah, definitely agree with that. And Carla, similarly, my background's in environmental science, and reading this book was difficult because it's not like most of the other books we read. It's definitely very tactical and functional, which we knew going into it. But yeah, I feel like you have to read this book maybe a couple times for it to really sink in. Mm-hmm. But yeah, the lawyer piece is definitely important. And I think something that Heather, you pointed out too, it's also what's important is don't let your lawyer do everything for you. You need to understand these concepts as well. Otherwise it could bite you down the line too.
I would say probably my favorite. I think they did a very good job of, yes, it's really dense and there's a lot of terms that you're not familiar with. At least I am not in that world at all, but they did work really hard to include humor into it. And sometimes they were poking fun at the lawyers a lot. So I did appreciate the sense of humor that they tried to bring to it.
Yeah, definitely.
I also liked, sorry, one last thing. I also liked how with when they were referring to a lawyer or an entrepreneur or a VC, they would mix up the pronouns. They would go she is a great lawyer or he is a great entrepreneur, and it wasn't just the typical he, him that they used. I really appreciated that in the book.
Yeah, I noticed that
Definitely
too.
noticed. Mm-hmm.
What's interesting is I went through this on audiobook, and I found that was a nice way to go through it. Even though it was so dense, it's okay, I can kind of listen to it with one ear and be focused on driving with the other ear. And I was listening to I think an earlier edition, and they actually had a note of well, we tried switching pronouns and it got confusing, so we're just going to use male and hopefully, nobody should mind. And I'm I mind. I'm glad that hopefully in later editions they did that again, because I'm no, you totally should switch pronouns.
That's funny. I'll share. So I'm going to say my least favorite thing first, because I want to get it out. So my least favorite thing was no, don't be a solo founder. So as somebody who is a solo founder, I kind of was annoyed with that because I do always hear that. And it just annoys me because it's like, yeah, of course, like I'd love to not be a solo founder, but I am. And like, yeah, so that sort of kind of annoyed me because everyone has different circumstances and like different situations they're acting in. And so to just like blanket statement say don't be a solo founder when there are plenty of solo founders who have been successful is just a little bit not fun to hear. But it is true that solo founders are sort of looked kind of as more risky, definitely. The other thing that I wish they would have talked about a little bit more is that first part that we kind of discussed is like, when do you know if you're ready to fundraise? And like, how do you know, like, how much should you fundraise? Like all these sort of things that you kind of need to determine before you actually start the process. I just felt like they didn't really touch on that, which again, maybe that's a whole other book in itself. So they couldn't cover that. But I know personally, kind of starting my own company, I feel like I've made a lot of like novice mistakes because I thought that I was doing things like, I thought I was doing it right, but really I wasn't. And I wasn't, had I understood some of those concepts around like what kind of stage my company's at, who I should be reaching out to, I probably wouldn't have made some certain like novice mistakes, but I guess that also comes with just experience, you live, you learn. So those were my kind of things I didn't like. And then my favorite part about the book, I think it was just really that's kind of why I presented it as like a vocab list, as like dry as that was. It made me appreciate it because now whenever I look at a term sheet, I'm immediately going to look for those words, because if you've looked at like a term sheet or agreements, there's a lot of like legal mucky mumbo jumbo that I don't even understand. I don't care. But if I can just highlight the terms that were covered here, then I'll focus on those items and, pay less attention to some of the other kind of fluff language that can sometimes be inserted. So that's what I kind of appreciated.
Leave the rest to the lawyer.
Yeah, but you have to pay like the ones that they highlighted. Now I'm going to be like, okay, I have to make sure I understand this part, this line.
Did you find that you had a good lawyer and a good relationship?
So personally, like my experience with lawyers hasn't been great, partially because I've always been really like kind of skimpy on how much I want to pay lawyers. So I feel like a lot of my lawyer interactions have been more transactional, which hasn't been like, maybe it helped save me money, which at the time I thought was like important, like the most important thing. But now looking back, like having like a true kind of legal partner who understands my business is going to be with me for the long run. I wasn't taking that as much into account in those moments. Let's see. Annabelle?
And curious also if you then found other like good resources or else around like solo founders, like blogs or like experiences from other solo founders, or a book that goes into talking about that.
Yeah, I should do that. But part of being solo founder is also like having not enough time to do all the things. So I haven't done as much of that as I could. But I am familiar with like companies who have had solo founders. I can't remember the names off the top of my head right now, but there are plenty of companies who were solo founders. And I think also if you were a successful solo founder, and then you start a second company, investors probably won't have any issue at all, you know, that you being a solo founder, if you have like a successful exit under your belt. I don't know if that's entirely true, but that's kind of my general feeling. Annabelle, did you want to share anything about the book, or if there's anything you liked or didn't like?
Yeah, sorry, I'm eating.
Oh, no worries.
It's 8:30 here, so but I guess there are a couple things that I found interesting in that. I think you both covered them in some way during your overviews. But just kind of the relationship building element, like I thought that was, you know, that's typical, I feel like, in the sense that you want to build a good relationship, but you know, you touched on it, Natalie, like how important that is actually with your lawyers and with the funder. Like it is actually something that is an important element to finding funders. So like, I thought that was enlightening. And then the other one was, I just forgot.
No worries.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you about the relationship things, a relationship aspect of it. I'll just share an experience in case this is helpful for anyone else kind of thinking about fundraising. So my company has we've only raised $265,000 from accelerators and incubators. And the way that we did that was let's see, the first incubator we were part of was the Los Angeles Cleantech Incubator. And I don't think we had a referral there. Like, I think that was purely like cold kind of, I'm going to submit this thing. Some incubators like Lacey, they have different types of programs. So we were initially accepted as part of their like innovators program, which was very light touch. But after that, we got into their incubation program, which was much like beefier, and we got some funding a little bit through that. So I think being part of that initial program kind of let them know, okay, like we know this person, now they can be part of incubation. And then for the accelerators, the way that I got in through Techstars was actually purely by like relationships. Actually, I wasn't even seeking to get into the accelerator, but it was somebody from WCS who had the accelerator approach her for her company. And she said, hey, I don't need funding. I just got funding, but talk to Natalie. And that's how like we got our first funding. So, you know, again, relationships, it doesn't have to be, relationships comes in all shapes and sizes. And sometimes they don't have to be like very long relationships. And sometimes it's just like, oh, I'm going to forward this email and, oh, this person, you know, this person knows this other person. So they must be good or something like that. And then the last accelerator we got funding from, I met one of their people at a conference. I had a booth and I spoke to this person for a pretty long time at the booth. And then when we applied for the accelerator, they knew that, you know, hey, so-and-so had met her at this event. So, so I guess the point, and I want to share that is, yeah, relationships can take all like sizes and timelines. So even though like I didn't have long relationships with each of these people, because I had like some kind of warm intro in some way, that's what seemed to work in my circumstances. And then, yeah, in terms of building like longer term relationships, that's where I think like a newsletter comes into account. Like once you meet people, keeping them on like your quarterly updates newsletter. So So they feel they feel like, you've been with them and they're getting updates. And then also, in LA, I try to go to like VC events. For example, there was recently like a tech LA event, and there was a climate investing event, and it was a hike. And I went and I saw some of the same VCs, from the last event that I saw them at. So, and we were able to just have a casual conversation. It was great. So anyway, I don't know if that's helpful, but just thought I'd share that.
What conference did you go to, and how did you find out about these like this VC event, for example?
Yeah, so the conference I went to was, I'm based in Orange County, California, and the conference I went to was called Octane, and it's specific to like Orange County. And there was this organization called Sustain SoCal that invited me to speak. So I spoke and I had like a booth. And that was right here in Irvine, California. And then let's see, what was your other question? Sorry, already.
It was about the conference and then the VC events.
Oh yeah, and then the VC event was it was just like I think it was maybe climate, it was part of Climate Week. We had a Climate Week that was supposed to rival like SF's Climate Week or something like that, or Tech Week. I don't know, I'm getting them all confused. I think it was Tech Week. And they had a large variety of different types of tech events, and there were some climate tech events. And that event was like specific to like climate investor, like founders and investors, like go on this hike. And I actually almost missed the event because of LA traffic, but luckily I didn't. So yeah, I'm sure in Boston you guys have like, just different meetup events. A lot of times the incubators are really good about having newsletters where they'll tell you about like, hey, these events are happening. These are all the climate events happening. That would be my recommendation.
Thank you. I applied to both Lacey's, same thing you did, Lacey's incubator, like last month, and Techstars last week.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I would be happy to like talk to you offline too about that.
Thank you.
Yeah. Very cool. Okay, maybe we can move on to the second question. And I kind of already, or not the second slide, sorry. Joey, can you move back to, oh yeah, that's the second question. Does anyone, and I've already shared some of my experiences, but does anyone want to share any experiences they've had related to fundraising, term sheets, cap tables, convertible debt, or even if it's not related, like maybe it's a different type of experience, but maybe there's some parallels. I find that sometimes hearing about what other people are going through or what mistakes they made is useful.
I will say, like this is not my world at all, but I recently went through a job search. My position was eliminated with the small sustainability consulting company, and I was looking for a job for 5 months before finding one with the Maryland Energy Administration. And went through a webinar on job search strategies, and very much the more applications you put out, the more interview opportunities you can get, and the more interview opportunities you get, maybe there's a second round. And so for me, that again, it's the theme that I kept seeing was it's so much about relationships. And so sometimes it's that cold call, sometimes it's the warm introduction, sometimes it's, hey, can I call up and get an informational interview? So it's like, I'm not expecting this person to directly get me a job, but maybe she knows someone who knows someone. And in the meantime, I can find out more about her work and more about what she does and get her advice and learn about what and learn. So if I ever do go into step into this world, I'll definitely read this book again, but also be thinking about what I learned through the job search, because I feel like, again, it's also like just have to keep pushing and keep asking, and the more.
Yeah, totally agree. And I similarly, before my startup with jobs, I got a job by I was going to like this meetup event. So every month I would go to these meetup events, and that's kind of how I got my last job. So yeah, I definitely think there's parallels with fundraising. And it's not always like being best friends with somebody. It could just be like, hey, I've seen you like 3 times now, like, and we've chatted 3 times, just happenstance, we were at the same events. Sometimes that might be all it takes. But I suspect also too, as you get higher in the fundraising amounts, it probably, those relationships probably matter more because there's more money on the line. I have a couple kind of experiences, let's see, related to fundraising. I can just talk about some mistakes that I made, if this is at all helpful. After Techstars, Techstars has a great sort of ability to make introductions to investors for you. And I just, it sounded like, oh, that's the next step for me. So I'll just start taking all these calls, because so the investors would kind of connect on this platform with you. And I didn't really I was just taking calls because I was like happy to have investors want to have a call with me. But I really didn't do as much of the legwork, kind of, again, like those first slides that we talked about. It's like, how much money do I want to raise? How long is that going to last me? Do I have all my due diligence documents together? So when I was taking all these calls, it just, a lot of them didn't go past the first call. I did do due diligence with one VC, but I wasn't really as prepared as I should have been now that I look back at it. So I would just say, when you go into fundraising, make sure you're totally in it. And not doing a little bit of fundraising, doing a little bit of this, doing a little bit of that, because I think, and I've heard this said, that when you're fundraising, you should really be focused on fundraising. And that, that can be hard. And that's why it's good to have a team, not to be a solo founder. But I think it definitely would have made a difference. A couple other things, let's see, related to my cap table. So when I first was doing incubators and things like that, I was, I thought that I had a really simple cap table, and why do I need a lawyer? Why do I want to pay another lawyer to do this for me? And eventually I did pay a lawyer to clean up my cap table, because it had gotten I basically, once I started getting larger sums of money, my cap table had to be cleaned up, because I didn't know what I was doing with the cap table, to be completely frank. And then it turned out that some of the shares from one of the incubators was never fully signed. So it was good that I finally got support from a lawyer for my cap table. But I also could have read this book and probably had a better starting point that I was working with. And then the term sheets, yeah. And then, so both of my my funding has been convertible debt. So, you know, again, like going through those term sheets, I think I relied a little bit too much on my lawyer. Like looking back, again, I wish I had read this book before I had gone through all that stuff, so that when I went through each document, I could have highlighted like, okay, you know, read this, make sure you understand this sentence. Because I think a lot of times when I see legal documents, like my brain just, like my eyes like roll back in my head and I don't know what the heck's going on. So that's just some experiences with that.
Were you working full time, Natalie, on this when you were fundraising, or how did you?
Yeah, so
Sorry.
that I also did incorrectly. So I made the mistake of quitting my job because I had been at my job for like 6 years and I was burnt out, and I had this startup idea, right? And I was like, I'm like ready to do this thing. But what I should have done, so I quit my job, took some time off to travel a little bit. That's a side note. But then I was just building the startup, and what I shouldn't have done that, because what happened was I built it within like a year off of like my savings and stuff like that. But then I ran out of my savings, and right when I was like supposed to like really get the sales and, you know, get the traction, was the time that I ran out of money, you know. So then I had to go back to work for a year, and I worked for a year and a half. I still had my startup, but I definitely wasn't working on it as much. So what I've heard that you're supposed to do is work full time until you're ready to like launch your kind of your demo product. Again, it depends on when you want to find financing, because I was not comfortable at the time with just trying to fundraise off of an idea. To be honest, I wanted to build my product. So I just did it in a way that was pretty scrappy and cheap. But what I should have done was I should have built while I was working. And then the moment it was done, and the moment that I really needed to get the traction kind of going, that's when I should have like quit my job. Not, hey, I have an idea, let me quit my job, then spend a lot of time building, then run out of money. Awesome. So anyone else want to share anything, or should we go to the second slide? Okay. Here we have a similar kind of question, is like, does anyone want to share any questions or experiences related to sort of the second half of the book, which was mostly kind of about like negotiation tactics? Was there anything else, Heather? Was it primarily negotiation tactics?
Actually,
Or how VCs work?
I have the ebook. Let me pull it up real quick.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it was negotiation tactics and raising money the right way, like pitfalls to avoid. And we've been talking, don't be a solar fenter. The various issues at different financing stages, the letter of intent, which is the kind of purchasing, the reason for the term sheets, and then the legal things. Definitely my biggest takeaway was the negotiations. I felt like, not being in that world, that was the most relatable for where I'm at right now. And I definitely felt like one of the other things they said that I didn't mention earlier was, they said, have your 3 things. What are your top 3 needs? And when you're getting ready for a negotiation, get prepared and know what you want going in, know what you're willing to concede, and know when you want to walk away. And actually thinking about it, I think when I was listening to it, what came to my mind was the next one of the goals I have with my husband is to buy a house. And so to thinking about negotiations, and it's like, I'm gonna need some of those skills when pursuing this, and that'll hopefully be helpful and interesting.
I think with negotiations, like, it's interesting because I feel like so much of this book is around finances, and like it really is, right? Like when you're a startup and you're trying to get funding, it's all about fundraising and term, like all of it's about finances, and like what you're willing to give up for what money you get now and what it's going to be later. And it's two things that are like really hard to talk about: money and then like conflict. So like, yeah, like, you know, it's good that the book touched on negotiations, and I thought that it was like cool that they like had different personas that they described, like the what did they have, like a car salesman type, like, and going back to your point, Heather, like I negotiated a little bit when buying my house, and like with the finance person, and like that was really hard for me as an individual doing like working with conflict. I thought I did a good job, and then at the end I was just like emotionally wrecked, but like I did a good job in the moment, but it was like it took a lot out of me to do.
Yeah. Or Heather, you were going to say something.
But at one point he talks about, I don't know if it's in this chapter or a later one, we talked about find out what your advantage is and what the other person's weakness is. And they were talking about like, okay, if you're a newer founder, you have a little bit more time. And so like schedule your call like right before dinner or right before they're going to go leave for a vacation or something, and try to figure out what your edge is against someone who's maybe more experienced.
Yeah, this also goes back to like kind of the whole preparation element. Like Natalie, you mentioned like there's so much of this book related to the term sheet that if you would have known, you might have approached it differently. I feel like even with negotiations, right? Like everything you're talking about, Heather, it's like, how do you know like what their weaknesses are, right? Like a lot of that is almost like, you know, in hindsight, or you have to like be in the world and like know the players and know the people to like really truly know those things. So I know, Natalie, you've been wanting to say something. Sorry, I jumped in.
Oh, no. I don't want to, I don't want to be talking all the time. No, I totally, I just agree with like the negotiation aspect of it, and like how, like, everyone grew up differently. Like I grew up not really knowing much about like finance. Like it was just something that, hey, like don't spend a lot. Like that was the extent of like my knowledge of finance. Like, you know, bring in more than you spend, and that. So this is all new to me, you know, like all this investment. Like I studied environmental science. I never even took an accounting class. Like, so this is all very like new to me. And I think like looking back on my experiences with some of the VC due diligence, I think I was like a little puppy. I was just happy to be there. I was just happy to like somebody wanted to have a call with me. And that was like, I wish I had done it differently. I wish I like really knew like, okay, this is what I want to get out of this call. This is like what I'm going to ask. And if they say no, like I'm going to push back, you know, here and there. But because I was just this like puppy kind of, I was just like, you know, like waiting for them to tell me, and I didn't have anything to push back on them, or, you know, even like I said, I was very novice in some of those calls. And now looking back, I do regret it. But I just think, yeah, it's just important to go into the negotiations, having read this book, having the knowledge to like get what you want out of the conversation, and to know like the steps that you need to take, like asking them, like, what's the process? Can I talk to some of your other founders? So yeah, preparing for those negotiations and having things that you want to specifically like ask. And I think that's, yeah, super invaluable.
Yeah, it reminds me a little bit about, yeah, like my mortgage loan, because I negotiated that, and like I knew where the wiggle room was with like specific things related to that I was able to be very pointed and be like, what is this? And then I think that's the same with like a job offer negotiation too. Like, what do you have to leverage? Like, what do you know about the culture of the company, and like what is negotiable with that type of company, whether it's like the type of company or the company itself, like doing that background research, like getting networked into some people who know about the company or who are already in the company. So stuff like that, like when you were talking about the like your experience in negotiating, it reminded me of like me negotiating my mortgage rate and me negotiating job offers.
Yeah. And also too, from the book, I forget where it said this in the book, but it said that everything's also always negotiable. So when a VC says, oh, like this is standard, whatever, no, like you can push back, and you know, everything is negotiable. So don't always just accept, you know, because people will throw around terms saying like, oh, this is just how it always is. And you can take that at face value if you don't know, again, if you like, you're not prepared, you don't know, you just said, okay, yeah, I'll go with that. But yeah, like that's why it's so important to like know kind of where to push back, for sure. Well, it's 6:55. I really enjoyed this conversation, and I hope you guys, I hope it, you know, there was some value that you got from these slides. And Joey will be sending out, do we send out, or we have a video of this presentation?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we send out the full event video.
Okay.
I think it should go out in the next couple of days. Yeah.
Okay. And yeah, and Joey, do you want to close this out? I think we have some closing slides, right?
Sure. Yeah. I'll close us out. Thank you so much, Heather and Natalie, for guiding this discussion. We really appreciate your time and sharing all of your experiences. So if you like this event, we have more. Mark your calendars for the July 20th Inflation Reduction Act panel. I'm really excited for this one. If you happen to be in the San Francisco Bay Area, we have a chapter building event in person in Mountain View. August 3rd, our next executive leadership workshop with Julie Castro-Abrams of How Women Lead. She'll be discussing getting on a corporate board, how to join a board, your board readiness assessment. It's a 2-hour workshop. It's going to be really awesome. Julie's incredible. And then on August 19th, we have a fireside chat with Janelva Williams. It's at Italy in LA. And if you check out the event page on the WCS website, we've got her full bio, her journey to her position. With LA, I can't remember exactly what it was, but it's a really incredible journey, and I'm really excited to meet her and hear her journey. And we also have a merch store. If you use the code WCS15 off, you can get 15% off your order. We've got some really fun stuff in there. And if you're not following us on social, join us in the virtual world. That is all I have. Thank you so much, everyone. I hope to see you at our next event. And thank you so much again, Natalie and Heather. We really appreciate your time and sharing with us.